The situation here is that Rosemary has developed this PowerPoint and she's answered certain questions. These questions are an ideal format with some additions as everybody gets further along for the defense. It just answers questions, and it's meant to focus the audience and answer questions that easily get unanswered because we add things, we ad lib, when in fact, when we're doing an oral defense or whatever, we need to keep focused. So Rosemary, and ask questions, we'll stop at 2 or 3 points in the presentation and say, does anybody have any questions? Rosemary did this last night to a new group, and there were wonderful questions, and you know they didn't know Rosemary's work. So whenever you're ready, Rosemary, you go right ahead.
Okay. My project, the overview of my project is increasing retention and proficiency when teaching the 12-hour level 1 Qt speech course. This is nothing like this has been done before, and making note of it to the academic advisor to the Qt Speech Association, she said this is groundbreaking because of the fact that there have been no previous studies of the problem. There's been no focus on these metrics. There has been no assessment to measure retention and proficiency, which are my 2 metrics, and no one assessed content by these metrics. My project is personal. I'm the mother of a deaf child, and I've been using Qt Speech with him for 23 years. He's 23 and a half. And I've taught Qt Speech for over the course of the past 23 years. Qt Speech is a visual mode of communication that uses hand shapes and placements in combination with the mouth movements of speech to make the phonemes of a spoken language look different from each other. This was created by Dr. Orrin Cornett, who was vice president in charge of at Gallaudet of extended learning, and the system is 55 years old. It was invented in the mid-60s. And he thought that because people were deaf, that they would get their information from reading. But in fact, it was brought to his attention that students that were in high school that took their SATs had a 3rd and 4th grade reading level in comprehension. The terms that I'll use in this presentation are the National Qt Speech Association, which is the national association which began in the 80s and is significant for any periodicals, any information regarding support and education and advocacy of Qt Speech, because so little research has been done about it. They hold a large portion of it. Q camps are where people go for a family weekend. There are individuals that are interested in learning how to Q, and you can do it in the course of 2 days, 6 hours a day for the time cycle of 12 hours. My quantitative metrics are retention and proficiency. Retention being to be able to retain the information that was given over the course of the 12 hours in order to be proficient with the mechanics of the system. Being able to be fluent and Q with aptitude. Why quantitative metrics? AMU requires it. I'm blaming it on AMU. Because I can show measurable improvement from the current state to the future state of my process map. I'll be able to demonstrate that. Why did I choose these metrics? After doing the value stream map, the process, these 2 metrics were the most valued to the customers, those who took the class. The graduates of the class would want to be able to cue independently with comfortability of the system without having to rely on a chart or other visual modes. They want to be able to just be able to cue to their child, period. Oops, my guiding coalition. In addition to advisor and doctoral committee SMEs who guide or advise the project, I don't remember that being in there. I skipped over that last night. Sorry about that. My guiding coalition is Dr. Donna Moreira from Gallaudet University. She's a clinical neuropsychologist and is very well read and does research in deaf and hard of hearing children with literacy studies and psychological studies and learning disabilities, etc. She has a deaf child herself, and she cued with him his whole life. Maureen Bellamy is regional director of the National Cued Speech Association and also the vice president of the Northern Virginia Cued Speech Association. She is an expert in cued speech and has been an advocate for cued speech, and she's currently a transliterator for cued speech in the school system. Dr. Katrina Copen is a linguistics professor at the Northern Virginia Community College. Maureen Bellamy and Katrina Copen are doing the assessments for my project to collect data, which will be presented in my dissertation. Oops, there we go. Limiting project scope. When I started out with my DBA, I was thinking of a lot of different ideas, and music played an important part of it because I'm a music educator and I've developed methodologies in music over the past 36 years. And I saw a lot of parallels between music and cued speech, and I was going to address those. I couldn't get metrics easily out of that, and I had to limit my scope to what I found was the most present problem that had come up over the past few years, having been a director of a camp, to be able to witness people that had struggled after learning the level 1 class. Why did I choose to limit my scope to this course? Because AMU required me to do so, and because I have learned too wide a scope leads to the 10-year plan. As and as said by Dr. Gee, save it for the postdoc. The beginning cued speech course, the course to be improved. What? Excuse me.
Rosemary, this has been great. We're just going to, there's a lot to absorb, and so we're just going to take a short break here and ask if anybody has any questions or any comments. As Rosemary is presenting and using this format, you can see the evolution. Any comments on the new format, anything you're learning, even though you've heard Rosemary talk about it a number of times? Are you seeing a progression of anything you're learning that you didn't quite understand before? We'll just take a minute, take some questions or comments. Anything come up for anybody before we go on to, we have about 35 or 36 slides. So we're about halfway through, but just thought I'd wait for a moment. Anybody have anything to say here?
This is Sandy. I just entered a comment in the chat box. Her previous slide mentioned using music. She had considered using music as part of the curriculum, to teach cued speech. And maybe I missed something, but how would you do this when you're instructing deaf students? Maybe that's a really simple.
That's
maybe
a great
I'm missing the point.
No. I didn't explain that. When developing curriculum for music, it is basically, music is like a foreign language. It has symbols that represent sounds, and it's learned the same way through receptive exposure, and then teaching expressively how to read, like how to read music and how to play an instrument. In cued speech, it's the same, it parallels, because initially we are expressing to the deaf person who is receiving it receptively, and so we expose them to, and they are the receptive learners, and then they develop language the same way, and there's parallels to how we learn music with symbol, sound, and fine motor, and how we learn cued speech, which is a symbol, sound, and use of fine motor skills. So the way I teach music literacy is I break it down in the same way I break down teaching cued speech. I don't use music to teach cued speech. I use the methodology for teaching music, which parallels the same elements as teaching cued speech. Does that make sense, Sandy?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Okay, I must have missed that. Maybe I don't remember it, but
No,
I'm sure you probably mentioned it a long time ago.
No, I can see how that could be confusing. Although I do have, I have had, and have 3 right now, deaf students who are taking music lessons and singing lessons. So
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, it's very few deaf people are stone deaf. They use their residual hearing. In the age of cochlear implants, it's easy to facilitate teaching them about pitch and rhythm. But anyway, good question. Thank you for that clarification.
And when Rosemary started, she actually wanted to write what amounted to 2 dissertations. And
Oh, I didn't know about scope at that time. I didn't realize that what would be entailed, and that was actually a large part of the journey early on, was really honing in on the specifics, and in fact that was the problem that brought me to this in the first place. So it was a roundabout way of getting right back to where I started from.
This was a tribute to Rosemary, because truly one of the things that is most perplexing for doctoral students is what on earth to write about. And there are so many things that could be written about, but we can't write about all of them. And, you know, we always say in the program, please just get 1 doctorate behind you. Just finish the darn thing and see it in the rearview mirror. And then you can write another one if you want to, but just please just do this one. But it's quite common. And one of the toughest things, and again, as you're thinking about your teaching all of you teaching doctoral students in the future, this is one of the things to give that's tough for anybody to make a decision about. It is just tough. And things happen. Things happen when we're trying to choose a subject. Life, things happen in our lives, things happen in our work, contractors change, all kinds of things go on that make us feel sometimes like we're standing at the edge of the ocean when the tide goes back out and the sand just goes out from under our feet. So it's a real problem. It's never easy. But anyway, thank you. Any other questions before we go on? All right, please go ahead, Rosemary.
I think did I back up? Limit the scope, we did that one. Oh, the beginning cued speech course, or level 1, the course to be improved. Parents take this course to start the process of learning how to cue to their children. So it's important for, if you are going to adopt the modality, this modality of communication for your child, to get as much information, much language as possible, the earlier the better. Who teaches this course? There are Q camps that are, there are about 5 every year that are all around the United States, and that teach it within the weekend. They're weekend camps. The National Acute Speech Association has meetings quarterly, or annual meetings, regional meetings quarterly, and annual meetings, and they always offer a beginning class during those times. And then the school systems offer workshops and classes in the evening time over the course of 8 weeks. They'll have an hour and a half a week or so, like that. Or different organizations, like we have NDRC, which is a resource for deaf, hard of hearing, and we offer them there as well. Who takes the course? Parents and professionals in the field of deaf and hard of hearing. Professionals who would like to be transliterators or speech pathologists can use it as a tool, a very effective tool. Audiologists to clarify what their deaf student is hearing. So every AMU project, begins with a problem which must be measurably eliminated or reduced. How did I know there was a problem? And as I mentioned before, graduates had not retained and fully understood and had enough drill to embrace the system confidently and comfortably and competently. They basically walked out of the class knowing how the system works, but not how to actually implement or apply the system. So at my camps, I've been a camp director for 15 years. I saw year after year people taking the beginning class again. And I'd see a lot of those people here in Northern Virginia, and they're like, I need a practice class. I need a workshop in cueing more. And I just remember when I first learned to cue, it took me 3 hours, and I was cueing because I needed to get language into my child. And if other people, if they felt roadblocks from that, I wanted to investigate and hopefully eliminate those roadblocks. Sorry, I have to go to the next one. Why did I do research? I wanted to improve the results or insufficient or ineffective amount of learning of course graduates. My explanation before. My research is heavily primary research. There is very little documentation of cued speech. I had gone to Gallaudet University and saw such a limited amount of articles, books, etc. on cued speech, looking up in various places. There was very little to be had. So I was able to speak directly to people who were there with Dr. Cornett. He passed in 2001, but there have been individuals like, for example, the mother of the first cueing child, who worked and co-wrote the handbook for cued speech with Dr. Cornett that I'm planning on going and speaking with. I spoke with her daughter. I spoke with other people who were able to implement the the acute speech program in Fairfax County as the first parents of that in the 70s. And so I have, because the grassroots are around here, and over the course of the past 22 years, I have rubbed elbows with many of these people, because we see them at conferences and other camps. People come to camps year after year. It's not just an annual camp that people come to just to learn. People come back year after year. And we're able to, Orrin Cornett's granddaughter, I've had conversation with. And so these people are an integral part of my research. And that's why I'm relying heavily on these primary sources.
Let's stop just for a moment. We know that the difference between primary and secondary research is the following. Primary research is when we talk to those who have actually done it, who have taught it, for example, who have made the improvement, who have done something. If Dr. Cornett was alive, Rosemary might be talking to him. Now, of course, he's no longer with us, but we can go back to any videos of him where he talks about it. We can go back to any of his writings. We can go back to those people, and you mentioned that lady who lives in North Carolina, I believe, and I want you to mention her again if you would, Rosemary. We can talk to those people who were there, and that's primary research. Secondary research is when we read or read or review something which someone has written about something that's happened. Someone has written about Dr. Cornett. Someone has written about how it was. One of the great pleasures I've had is when I've been in D.C. and had an opportunity to visit Rosemary. She has stacks and stacks of syllabi that go back until the 70s from various people in various camps that she's able to take out, just as we were mentioning before. And those are primary documents. She's, as she mentioned, you mentioned someone you're going to drive down to and see in Raleigh.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Can
Yes.
you explain who that lady is?
Yes. Marielle Daisy is the co-author of the handbook that Dr. Cornett wrote that basically covers everything about cued speech, as well as individual stories of cuers. And her daughter was the first child that Dr. Cornett taught to cue.
Right.
Well, taught the family to cue, and she was the first cueing child. And I worked with her daughter, who's my age, and have talked to her about coming down to Raleigh, North Carolina, because apparently she has stacks of information that she held on to from when she worked with Dr. Cornett, because she worked very closely for many years with him before the newer edition of this handbook, which is like 700 pages, came out. They had co-written a smaller, more basic handbook years before. So she has been an integral part of the evolution of cued speech and how it's presented, cued speech, and how it gained notoriety locally and internationally. It's been accommodated for 60 different languages, adapted to 60 different languages plus. They're doing, and they just finished Amharic in Africa, and they're working on a new one right now, a new country, a new language. And so it's she's been very active in it and speaks of it, and I am going to be taking a drive down to Raleigh and speaking with her and seeing as many of the resources that she has, making copies and utilizing them for my research.
Now, we make the point that at AMU, we do action research. And that means, of course, we do research. But really, it isn't just a study. The difference between, let's say, a PhD and a DBA generally is a PhD is meant to be a study. It's not meant to improve things. It can identify improvements and so on. But it's an observation. A DBA, on the other hand, really brings people to making the improvements, carrying it to that final step. And so we talk about the research, but in Rosemary's case, it's quite something. She has a window into materials that no one else has. No one has these materials. No one even knows they exist. And so another one of the reasons that her work is groundbreaking is because she may follow this with a postdoc and just talk about that, not write another doctorate, just about that early material. She's when you go down to see that lady, for example, you'll be recording what she says. You'll be taking notes. If you can, it's often recommended when we're doing that kind of very important interview that we take someone else along so that you can record it, so somebody can take notes, so that you can take notes, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And so it's just a thought. There's a field of research called ethnography. And ethnography tries to capture those, I'll give you an example, tries to capture something different. For example, if one were interested in, say, the original folk songs of the Carolinas, and you were out there recording those, having people play those songs, interviewing people, that would be called an ethnography. So this is, has some tentacles into it. So there's quite something. Did you say you had talked to Dr. Cornett's grandchild?
Yes, she came to camp one year, and she was very, she was young at the time. She was just in college, but she has continued on with his legacy, and she is also someone, I'm Facebook friends with her, and she's somebody else I can contact.
I understand. Are his children still alive?
I don't know. I think so. Yes. As they spoke at his funeral, that was 20 years ago, so I couldn't tell you.
You might want to, if they are still with us, you might want to interview them. Again, this whole question that you're trying to see is, did he absolutely focus on skill-based learning and intensive drill? There's a window that no one else has, and it's closing fast because nobody has written about it except you, Rosemary, in this way. And so it's quite something. The question came up from one of the new DBAs last night. Well, wait a minute. What about peer-reviewed articles? It doesn't sound like AMU is requiring peer-reviewed articles, and the fact is that we don't. We understand that we want someone. It isn't just about the research. It's about making the improvement. So whereas we can understand how if there was a heavier emphasis on the research part, that someone would make that peer-reviewed means that it's an article written that a board of experts has given approval to. Are there any questions or comments about this aspect of Rosemary's work? This is actually developed while Rosemary was working away. She didn't intend to write about this or discover this, but suddenly, surrounded by boxes of material at her kitchen table, it suddenly came to everybody that, oh my goodness gracious, this is just wonderful. Don't let any of this out of the house. So are there any questions or comments about this? Just this aspect? Thank you, Rosemary. All right, let's go on. Well, we have about 20 minutes or so.
What
I know
action?
I know that's plenty of time.
Okay. What actions have I taken to achieve quantifiable improvements? Whoops. Hold on a second. This one. Drew process map up to display visually the process flow and steps so I can improve the process, and calculate baseline for metrics. What I've done basically is videotaped people from 6 different teachers, the graduates of the level 1 class, and had them with and without the cued speech chart cue 20 words. And I have my 2 in the Guiding Coalition that have graded their performance. And I've tracked, the different teachers, if there was similar mistakes, etc. And also from, I taught a class of a number of students, and they've looked at my the results of my students' performance as well. I showed 2 process maps of the current state right now. I probably have 5, and I'll be, of course, doing my own. Love the book. What? Oh, wait a minute. There. Oops. Sorry. What are my improvements and my metrics? And, well, I still have more work to be done on that, so we'll be presenting that information on June 27th, graduation. Well, when I give my defense.
Friday the 26th, I think.
Friday the 26th. And learning points. Oh, I can't. There. I'm going too fast. Learning points. Most challenging tasks was collecting the data, because I ended up traveling to different camps around the country, and making sure, and it's also, if people would like to be a part of this study, I had enough people for each one of the camps. Some I had less than others, so that was difficult. And finding secondary resources for the research, like we mentioned earlier, and of course having to juggle family, job, and other extracurricular things that are going on in my life. My most rewarding insights. The combination of classes and learning about quantitative metrics and process improvement, and going along with my work has just the parallel together, and it was easier when I was in the throes of my research to be able to, as time went on, say, how does my project relate to that? Because for process improvement, et cetera. That was tough in the very beginning, but as time went on and I learned more, it was more enriching for me to go through that process. Also, just by doing the research, and I felt like I was a detective, or trying to uncover the holes in different in the chronological line of events that that occurred from the inception of cued speech to today. And that was fascinating as well. So,
Rosemary, as your work has evolved over the last year and a half plus, have your insights and what might be called the satisfaction from them, has that evolved too? Has that changed? It sounds like it has. It doesn't mean that something's out of favor. It just sounds like as your work has gone on, more things are bringing you, surprising pleasure, I would say, about a number of things.
yes, the more I discover, the more I go through each process, the more I'm going through a personal growth too. It's happening at the same time. And I don't know if this is related to it, but it reminded me of it as I'm having to implement the things that I've learned and going through the dissertation evolution. There's been opportunities for me to present or reflect and see that I'm looking at things in with a different perspective, a broader perspective, like expanded my perceptual field about certain things. I'm much more comfortable with the language, and I don't feel as a plebe as I did a year and a half ago in talking about this, and I've just learned so much.
That's great. Please go ahead.
Okay. Next, my overall advice to new doctoral students. Don't hesitate or stop when you don't understand the process or new vocabulary. In the very beginning, everything was business related, and as I said, I had a hard time putting, it was like putting a square peg in a round hole. And I was frantic about looking up everything and being able to memorize it, and the process was much more relaxed than that. And it was like more of a discovery and an exploration rather than something that was so rigid. Don't be afraid to ask questions. A lot of times when I didn't understand something or something wasn't clear, it was an opportunity for that to be explained, and others benefited by it too. And so when other people in the cohorts, when we worked together and when Dr. Gee would ask what we gained from particular evenings class, those insights, and even having to verbalize what it was that we had taken, the takeaway was an exercise in and of itself, and something that was very enriching and validating, because a lot of times it was, yeah, I second that, and there was a lot, and it just kept everybody on track to, yeah, I got it, because a lot of times you're out in the field alone with this information, and to have the opportunity to have the dialogue with the cohorts, it was just, as I said, validating and very uplifting to go through that. So it's important just to keep on keeping on. And my contact information, which if anybody wants to contact me and discuss any of this stuff further, please feel free. Thank you, Dr. Gee. Thank you for your interest and success you can measure, because it's all about the metrics.